It is officially 2026, and of course that comes with the expectations of what in the world am I going to be reading this year. Last year, I did participate in the 25 and 2025 trend. I did not post a video about this, but I did have this sort of informal list, and I do think I did a pretty good job. I think I finished around 70%, which in my opinion I think is pretty good. I wanted to continue with this trend moving forward into 2026, but I wanted to go at it with a couple of different goals in mind. The main goal for me is to read down my physical TBR, in particular to read down books that I have owned on my shelves for a very long time. There are a couple that are like more newer releases, especially ones that are continuations of series that I have really enjoyed. So I have a couple of like third books in series, particularly because I am very avoidant when it comes to final books in series, because I don't like saying goodbye to worlds and universes that I love. But I think with reading some of the older books, I also want to make myself more excited to pick up books that I have been putting off for some time. So there is a bit of a mix here. But so without further ado, let's just get into the books. These are in no particular order. They're just what I have in front of me. Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Weber. This is a series that I first heard about in 2020, and I believe I purchased it then. And I have since collected all of the books in this series, yet I have not started it. It's following two sisters who I believe are twins, and one is raised as a princess, the other one is raised as a witch and is set to sort of cause this revolution to take the throne from her sister on behalf of the witches who kidnapped her at birth. As someone who grew up loving the Barbie Princess and the Pauper movie, anything that has to do with like twins and like switched at birth or like switching positions is automatically like intriguing to me. And I've heard good things about the series, and I do have the rest of it, so hopefully I will start this one and really enjoy it and then want to continue with the rest of it. The next book I have is Alchemy of Secrets by Stephanie Garber. I have read both Stephanie Garber's Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I personally like the Once Upon a Broken Heart series a lot more, but I am really intrigued by Alchemy of Secrets. I've heard some like mixed opinions, but I do think the overwhelming opinion that I've heard about this series is more positive. I'm a bit hesitant because I know that this one has a lot to do with cinema studies, and I'm not really a big movie person, but because I have like Stephanie Garber's books in the past, I am excited to pick this one up. This is also the Fairy Loot exclusive special edition, The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This was actually on my 2025 list and was one of the books that I did not have a chance to get to because it is a humongous like 800 to 900 page fantasy book, and I sadly got very busy at the end of the year and just didn't really have the time to pick this one up, even though it's one that I have been anticipating for quite some time. I also do want to kind of get back a little to my roots of like reading more traditional like high fantasy books, because I feel like in 2025 I kind of slipped a little bit into the romantasy rabbit hole, to the point that I had some people commenting on my channel saying that I was a romantasy channel. Necessarily know if I 100% agree with that characterization, so I'd like to get into more of the classics of the fantasy genre like this series, because I kind of miss more serious fantasy, if that makes sense. Another one that is sort of similarly in this older fantasy discussion is the Dark Elf series. This is actually a bind up of the 3 books in this trilogy, and I have read the first 2 books, but I did start reading this in 2020, so it is one that has been like on my TBR for quite some time. I didn't end up getting this edition of it until like a couple years later after I found it in a thrift store. That was part of the reason why it took me so long to continue with this series, is because I wasn't able to find these or any copies of the second and third book. I did end up finding this one, which is a bind up of all 3 of them, and I only have the third one, which is called Sojourn, left. But this one is set in the Forgotten Realms universe, which is also the universe that the video game Baldur's Gate 3 is set in, and the main character of this, Driss Jordan, actually does make an appearance in the first 2 Baldur's Gate games, as well as there is a slight reference to him in Baldur's Gate 3, which let me know if you know what I'm talking about. It's actually a very funny reference. The next one is also one that's been on the TBR for a very long time, since 2020, and it's The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is apparently a fantasy retelling of King Lear by William Shakespeare. I do really quite like Shakespeare, and King Lear is actually one of the ones that I have not yet read, but I think that it would be really interesting to read this book in combination with King Lear, and also to do more more research around what inspired Shakespeare with writing that play, as follows like the three sisters like King Lear does. And I think each of them have different roles on the eve of their father dying or something like that, which I think is what the King Lear play is largely focused around. I also think that this one has a lot more political elements to it as well, and I do really like political fantasy. This one just seems like something that I would really enjoy and something that I would have a very fun time doing more research around as well, which is something that I hope to get more into, as I really do think that critical reading and critical reflection around books is something that's very important and something that I want to be more intentional about moving forward. Speaking about critical reading though, the next book I have, I feel in general there's just a lot of discussion, both positive and negative, around this book, and would like to read it to be able to more accurately participate in this discussion around the book. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to make content around it, just because some people can get very vitriolic about it. I'm not saying that it's wrong to, but just that I'm a bit cautious. And it's Alchemized by Senlin Yu. I feel like this is one of the more popular books of 2025, and obviously has a lot of controversy around it, whether that's about the author, the inspiration behind it, or about the actual content itself. But I would really like to actually read this book for myself to make my own opinions about these topics. I also am really intrigued by the topics and discussions that the book is raising as well. Once again, I can't 100% give an accurate estimation of like what I'm gonna feel about it, and I do know that a lot of people have complicated feelings about this book, and that there is a lot of really valid criticism I think being raised against it, but I want to be able to make up my own mind about it before engaging too much with other people's thoughts about it. This is also the Fairy Loot exclusive edition of it, and I do quite like this edition. I think it's really pretty. I would also like to read A Forgery of Fate by Elizabeth Lim. I have read a lot of the books by Elizabeth Lim before, including her duology Six Crimson Cranes, of which A Forgery of Fate is sort of like a spin-off towards. One of the main characters in this is a character that we were introduced in that duology prior, and I was really interested in that character's storyline. I'm very excited to get to this one. This is also the Owl Crate exclusive edition that I think is really, really pretty. I did an unboxing video recently where I talked more and sort of showed off this edition more, but I am very interested how the author is going to explore kind of themes in this. I don't want to talk too much about it just because I don't want to accidentally spoil something from Six Crimson Cranes, but I think that series was really interesting as well, and I'm excited to see what the author does in this one. The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is another one that's been on my TBR for a while, and it's sort of like I think like veteran of the fantasy genre, so to speak. This is actually John Gwynne's second series. The first one is his series called The Faithful and the Fallen, the first book being called Malice. I think I'm more intrigued by Shadow of the Gods, especially because this one has like a wintry sort of like Nordic inspired setting, and given that I'm in the throes of Canadian winter, I feel like this is one that I am more intrigued to pick up soon. I've also heard some really, really good things about John Gwynne's writing, both of these series. I also absolutely love the YouTube channel that his two sons, Ed and Will, have. Just love the passion that they have for talking about their dad's books and just about fantasy books in general. They have a great channel, and I'll probably link it down below so that people can go and watch their videos. The Shadow of the Gods is one that I would like to get to soon. Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. This was another one that was on my 25 and 2025 list, and it's one that I've been very hesitant to get to because of how much I did really enjoy the original Red Rising trilogy. Like, I did really enjoy the ending to it, so I didn't really see like a reason to continue to a certain extent. And then I also found out that my favorite character dies later on, so I'm obviously not going to tell anyone who my favorite character is, but it does make me nervous about continuing with the series if I already know something bad is going to happen to the one character that has made me so invested in the series in the first place. I do believe that Red God, which is the last book in this series, is slotted to come out this year, and so I think I would like to try and read as many in this series as possible so that maybe I can read that one when it comes out and be with everyone, as like the hype around the series conclusion is currently ongoing, as I actually read the entirety of the Stormlight Archive series and I was able to enjoy the end of the era with everyone. So I did really enjoy that experience of being able to be excited about reading that book alongside everyone else. So I hope that I'll be able to kind of get to the rest of this series so that when Red God does come out that I get to be in on the hype with everyone. I don't like feeling left out. Another one, also a big classic of the genre, and this is one that I have actually already read before, but it's been years since I have reread it, and it's The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, prequel to Lord of the Rings that is following the stories behind the elves in this world. And I absolutely loved this when I read it as a kid. I was like 10 years old when I read this for the first time, so it's been like well over a decade. Very excited to reread this one, and I have had like informal plans to reread it for quite some time because I did remember loving it so much when I did first read it. However, because I was quite young at that time, I feel like there was elements of nuance to the story that I didn't really pick up on because I was a child. This book in particular is also really inspired by a book called The Kalevala, which is a Finnish folklore and mythology, and I do actually have that book, and it's one that I would like to read in combination with this. More so study those academic inspirations behind it, sort of similar to the way I talked about the Queens of Innisleer as well, because I really love this kind of connection between fantasy and classics and how fantasy books take inspiration from real world mythology and folklore. So this is one that I would like to study more about, and to study it I obviously have to reread it, and I also just want to reread it from the perspective of having enjoyed this book in the past and enjoyed the author before as well. And possibly if I do end up like loving this one, and like I might also continue with rereading the Lord of the Rings series as well, because it's also been years since I have reread those books, and it's also been a couple of years since I rewatched the movies. I used to rewatch the movies every single year during the holiday break, but I haven't really done that as much lately. So I was like obsessed with the movies as a kid. I used to like watch them constantly. They were definitely like a hyperfixation for me. And I've also been playing the Tales of the Shire Switch game recently too, so I think that might have something to do with the fact that like Lord of the Rings stuff is just on my brain in general. Blood Solace by Villa Roth. This is the follow-up to a book called Blood Grace, which was I think probably my favorite book that I read in 2025. It's like a political romantasy with like vampires, and I just really loved every single aspect about it. I absolutely adored the main character, and I think they have one of the best well-developed romances that I've ever read in like a romantasy series. It also has some really interesting world building, magic system, and I just loved the way that the politics were developed in the world, and I think it was done really well, especially like in contrast to I think some other romantasy books that I've read in the past. So this is a series that I'm really excited to continue with. Sort of on a similar topic because it's also about vampires is Empire of the Dawn, which is the third book in J. Kristoff's Empire of the Vampire series, which is another series that I have absolutely loved in the past. Very dark, like grimdark world. We're following a main character who is like the son of a vampire and a human woman, and so they're able to wield the powers of the vampiric bloodlines, and they're using them to fight against the evil vampires in this world. So it's definitely very dark, and it's one that I would caution people about reading unless if they're okay with delving into those darker topics. Overall, I think it's a really good fantasy series, and I would really like to continue and finish with it, though I am someone who is very avoidant when it comes to last books in series because I hate like saying goodbye to series that I've loved, especially when they are as dark as this series has been, and I feel like every single character that I love is going to die. Which I think is a good reason to be hesitant about things, personally. Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. I read the first book in this series called One Dark Window last year. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. I think it was just maybe a bit surface level in some areas, but I do have the second one, and this is the Fairy Loot exclusive editions of them, so I feel like I should continue with it. I also do have Rachel Gillig's other series called The Night and Its Moth, which I've heard like nothing but good things about, so I would like to read Two Twisted Crowns before starting her other series, just because I'm a bit of a completionist and like to have things done before continuing other series personally when it comes to the same author, even though the series I don't think have anything to do with each other. Also similarly, a conclusion to a series is The Nightshade God by Hannah Whitten. I really liked the first book in the series called The Foxglove King, and I didn't like the second one as much, but I still did enjoy it. This one is a bit darker as well, following a main character has shadow-based magic, and it's in this world where magic is forbidden. She ends up getting like recruited by the evil king to kind of like work on his behalf so that she's not killed. And there's a lot of like court politics as well in it. So I really liked the first book in this series, and I'm excited to see how things are going to end, especially because the second book kind of ended on a cliffhanger. But sort of similar to Empire of the Dawn, I'm very hesitant to continue and finish series that I really enjoyed. If I put it on this list, I gotta read it. The next book is, once again, similar. Continuation of a series that I started years ago and haven't finished, and it's Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the first book in the Witcher series that is actually like a proper novel. The first two books are actually short story collections. I have read the first one. I think I'm going to skip the second one just because I'm not a big fan of short stories, and I feel like that is part of the reason why I've been hesitant to continue with this series. I have watched like first season of the Netflix show, but I haven't continued with it because I wanted to read the books. I also know that people really love the video game behind, and I haven't played it because I want to finish the series because the video game is set after the events of the novels. Also, kind of similar to some of the other books that I've mentioned previously, this is a book that takes a lot of inspiration from history, in particular Jewish history and Poland, and I'm actually taking a course in university this year that is specifically about Polish Jewish history, and I feel like reading this series that takes inspiration from Polish Jewish history in combination with taking a history course on the same subject matter is going to really help to enrich my experience with this book, as well as I do have plans to read more books around the same topic, and I feel like I can maybe do like a video talking about some of those themes that might broaden people's understanding of this series, as well as will encourage me to engage with this series and its different media like the video game and the TV show that I'm also very interested in enjoying. The next one kind of also similar in terms of it being like one that's had a lot of influence on things is Dune by Frank Herbert. Once again, this is one that I've had on my TBR since 2020, and I actually wanted to read this for the new movie came out because back in 2020 I used to have a crush on Timothée Chalamet, which I feel honestly kind of like embarrassed to admit. I feel like it's one of the more significant stories in terms of the classics of the genre and science fiction. It also has a lot of like fantasy inspiration as well. There's also a lot of real world conversations, so sort of similar to what I was talking about just now with Blood of Elves in terms of the fact that it takes a lot of inspiration from particular historical time periods. I do think Dune also has a lot of inspirations taken from history as well, so I feel like this would be a book that I would like to explore a lot more in terms of the academic literature around it, and also around the themes and topics that the book is discussing, and also to engage with some of the more multimedia aspects of it, like the film, kind of similar to Dune in terms of being like a science fiction classic. Neuromancer by William Gibson. This is one that I recently hauled, and I think the topics in this book that is sort of bringing up around like the dystopian-esque future of like the digital marketplace is very interesting, especially now that we are kind of like living in this dystopian kind of future in of itself. I think this is also a really big inspiration behind the film's trilogy, The Matrix. I do feel like this one is going to bring up a lot of really interesting and thought-provoking discussions, and it's a book that I would like to also similarly put in conversation around a lot of academic literature around like the digital future, and also contemporary discussions around AI and other things like that. And I have some ideas for like video essays that I'd like to go more in depth into those topics. So this is one that I'm highly anticipating getting to in terms of kind of shifting gears. The next book is one that I've been wanting to read for quite some time. It's not one that's been on my physical TBR for the longest time, but it is one that has been on my Goodreads want to read list, I think, since 2016, and it's Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. I have like a distinct memory around the time that the Vampire Academy movie came out, which it was kind of in like the heyday of like the Twilight, Hunger Games era, and like I really wanted to read this book, but I never got around to reading it, and I think it was because like it was always just like out of stock at my library or something like that. Like it was just one that like everyone was reading, so I'd like to get around to reading it. I do think I have a lot of other books in this series, and I would like to do sort of like a fun reading vlog that's like reading books that I wanted to read when I was a kid or something like that, just to emphasize more of those like nostalgia vibes, and hopefully maybe encourage some others to pick up books that they want wanted to read when they were younger as well, because I feel like, especially as we get older, there's a lot of like pressure to read like more serious books. To be like, this video in of itself is kind of an example of that, because I have talked about some more serious books that I would like to get to, but I also feel like there is a place to enjoy like things that we would have liked when we were kids. That's why I would like to read Vampire Academy, and I also just love vampires in general, so as you can probably tell because I talked about some other vampire books. Bonecryer's Moon by Catherine Purdy. This is one that I'm maybe a little bit less excited about than some of the others on this list, just because I don't really know what to expect from this one, but I picked this one up in 2020 and it's one of the few books that I like can deliberately like remember purchasing and haven't yet read. But I believe we're following like a main character and she has some sort of magic that is like only unlocked after she kills her one true love. I think that's a pretty common like trope within like YA romantasy in general, but I still am excited to see like how the author explores those themes in this. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I feel like this one like really took off when it first came out. Also inspired by history in terms of, I think it's largely inspired by World War I. I think there is like a fine line between taking like too much historical inspiration, and that's sort of like a criticism that I've heard towards this book in terms of like the fact that the fantasy aspects don't really seem as relevant. But I still am intrigued to read this book. I do have the second one as well as the prequel, which is called Wild Reverence, so I would also like to get to those ones as well. And I've also heard some good things about Rebecca Ross's writing in general, so I am anticipating reading this one. A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. I have read her other book called Song of the Six Realms, and it's one of my favorite like YA fantasy books of all time. It's one of those few books that I felt like really just swept me away into like another world. Like I genuinely felt like I was inside of the world and experiencing the events alongside the characters instead of like just like reading about them. Like I just felt really immersed in the story overall. So this is actually her debut series, and I'm really interested to see how this one compares to the other series. And I think that the concept behind this, which is like a character who uses poisons as like magic, which is actually a similar idea as what I'm exploring in one of the books that I'm currently writing. So I am excited to see how the author kind of explores those ideas. And also, I don't want to like say that like I'll take inspiration from it or anything, but just like to see how author is also using a similar topic that I think is really interesting to explore. Another one that's also by an author that I have read from and enjoyed before is Cazadora by Romina Garber. I read Lobizona last year, and Romina Garber is actually one of my favorite authors because she wrote one of my favorite series called Zodiac, which is a sci-fi series inspired by the zodiac signs, and I read it when I was in high school and I absolutely loved it. I was a bit hesitant to read her Lobizona series just because I had such positive memories about reading Zodiac, and I can get sometimes like nervous about continuing with authors that I've loved in the past because I don't want to not like their new books. But I really enjoyed Lobizona, and I think there's a lot of like interesting ideas around this book. And we follow a main character named Manu, who is an undocumented immigrant who discovers that she also has magic and has to go to this magical academy. People with magic are divided into witches and werewolves based on gender, and I feel like there is a lot of really interesting commentary on identity and how identity shapes our notions of belonging in the world. I have an idea for a video that I want to do about werewolves, and I feel like this one is going to be really helpful in sort of fleshing out more of those ideas that I want to discuss around werewolves and how they're used in modern sort of fantasy and stuff like that. It's a very complicated video, but I do feel like it's one that people will be interested in when I do get around to doing it. The next book that I would like to read is also a carryover from my 25 and 25, The Grace of Kings, which is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. But I do have the entire series in the Broken Binding exclusive editions, and I kind of bought them a little bit on a whim because I really liked the design of them. Inspirations that it's taking kind of reminds me a lot of one of my favorite video games, which is called Honkai Star Rail, because this takes a lot of inspiration from both Chinese history and mythology, and also it's set in like a futuristic space kind of setting, and in Honkai Star Rail there is this planet called the Xianzhou, which is like futuristic like spaceships, and also takes inspiration from Chinese folklore and history. So I'm very interested to read this series. I already have the whole series. I'm a bit hesitant to read it because I obviously want to enjoy it because I've already invested a lot of money into it. This one will have a lot of really interesting commentary, and also one that I think will be very interesting to discuss further in terms of like researching the historic inspirations. Sort of also in the same conversation around history, it is actually a historical fiction book, and it's The First Man in Rome by Colleen McCulloch. This is the first book in a 7-book long series that is basically tracing the history of the family of Julius Caesar. And this one, I believe, we're following Julius Caesar's uncle, Gaius Marius, who did try and sort of overthrow the Roman government earlier than he did. This is the first book in that series that is following more of that history. I believe I have 4 of the books in this series, and I'm also very interested in Roman history, and I have also noticed this like trend as of late where there's a lot of romantasy books taking inspiration from Roman history. So I think that reading this book and also some of the non-fiction books that I have about Roman history in combination with some of those romantasy books will be really interesting to kind of promote like a larger discussion about how history is used in storytelling and stuff like that. I don't know if this is actually of any interest to other people, but as someone who does like history and likes romantasy and likes fantasy and likes all these different genres, it's interesting to me. The next one is yet another big book and one that I'm very intimidated by. It is, however, one that I've already started, and it's The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I had to put it down because this book is like literally physically too heavy for me to hold properly because I do have like kind of smaller hands, so like you can see like this is not comfortable, as well as I have had a previous hand injury before that makes it a bit harder to like hold things. So usually when I'm reading like bigger books I prefer to read hardcovers, but I only have this one as a paperback copy. I might see if I can get the audiobook to read this with because I don't personally like digital reading, so it's more of like it's the actual physical book and not anything to do with the book or the themes, because I was actually really enjoying it. This is also a very popular series as well, so I would like to continue with it, and it has dragons in it. Who doesn't love dragons? Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. I have read her other book that is called Kaikeyi, which is also inspired by, I believe, the Ramayana. I do think it has like a similar inspiration as also being inspired by Hindu mythology and folklore, taking stories that usually focus on male characters and focusing more on the untold stories of the female characters who tend to be more vilified. I also think that this one will have a lot of potential to do more research, because I've never actually read the Ramayana, which is that would also be, I think, like a cool project to do in terms of like broadening my understanding about history and the literary inspirations. And then the last book that I have is one that I've been putting off, I think, because I really love this author. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. I absolutely adore Brandon Sanderson. His Stormlight Archive series is like my favorite series of all time. The second book, Words of Radiance, is probably my favorite book ever. Kind of been putting off continuing with the Cosmere because I'm sort of in mourning Stormlight Archives, because I know that it's not going to be published anytime soon, but I do have some of these secret projects still left, so this is one of them. I also have the Isles of the Emberdark special edition as well, and I don't own the Sunlit Man, but that is the other one of the secret projects that are in the Cosmere that I haven't read. I have read Tress and the Emerald Sea, and I haven't read the Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England or whatever it is, but it's not actually relevant to the Cosmere, and I've personally found myself that I'm not a huge fan of Sanderson's works outside of the Cosmere. I have read his Skyward series, which is also one that I would like to continue with, but I'm not a huge fan of that in comparison to how much I like his Cosmere work, in particular how much I like the Stormlight Archives, as despite having read all of the Mistborn books, I don't really like the series as much, which maybe that's a controversial take, but Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is one that seems really intriguing to me. This is also a special edition of it, and I do think that the themes and topics that this book is discussing seem really interesting. I think we're following like two characters who are almost like star-crossed lovers. I haven't really super loved like Sanderson's takes on romance in the past. I have some that I like more than others, but I still am really interested in getting to this one. I think that brings us to the end of this video, and hopefully that was 26 books. I didn't exactly like count them them going in, so it might have been like 27, it might have been 25. But I hope that maybe from this list you got some inspiration about like maybe what books you want to read, and also I hope that maybe by discussing these books and the goals that I have around like doing more research in them encourages people to kind of think more critically about books. Sort of been in this like weird spot with like my channel at large where I feel like people don't really watch my book content as much as they do like my commentary content, and so I sort of wanted to try and bridge that gap a little bit by doing commentary about the books that I've read and sort of expanding upon that to talk more about historical issues as well as contemporary issues. But I don't necessarily know how interested people are in those things, but I hope that by talking about them that maybe people will be more interested. As always, feel free to let me know what you think of this video. Feel free to let me know if you read any of these books, what you thought about them. If you have any like additional readings on top of these things, because like a lot of them I talked about like additional research that I would like to do. So if there are any that I mentioned that you're like, oh, this one has like a really interesting inspiration behind it that you didn't mention, like 100% feel free to comment that, because that's like my favorite thing about reading books, is being able to do like all this extra research about like what inspired it and stuff like that. So I hope that kind of passion that I have for reading and exploring the books that I read in more depth does sort of appeal to at least some people. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you decide to stick around and continue watching this channel into the coming year, and also that you're excited by some of these plans that I have. So without further ado, thank you and goodbye.